Welcome to Barnabas's Boneyard. I, of course, am your host, Barnabas, and welcome one and all to episode 3. So if you couldn't tell by the title, today I am going to be reviewing the brand new Children of the Corn remake. Now, I know you may be asking yourselves, Barnabas, there's a Children of the Corn remake out? And to you, dear viewer, I would say yes. Unfortunately, there is. So this Children of the Corn remake is kind of the second of back-to-back Children of the Corn remakes. And it also marks the 11th entry in the Children of the Corn franchise, which of course began in 1984 with the adaptation of the 1977 Stephen King short story. That one, now lives on as kind of an 80s horror classic. Rightfully so. I mean, it's not the best movie to come out of the 80s, but it's a serviceable horror film. I just rewatched it actually after watching the new one, and well, I'll talk about it because it's definitely, I think, fair to compare on the basis of the movies being quite different from one another. And I'll talk about that and why the old one works, why the new one maybe doesn't work. But before I get too ahead of myself, the new Children of the Corn was actually made in 2020 by director Kurt Wimmer, the acclaimed director of such classics as Ultraviolet and Equilibrium. I think he also served as writer on movies like Law Abiding Citizen, the Total Recall remake, and some others. So clearly he's kind of got this niche in like futuristic action thrillers. So I don't know what made him jump over to horror. I guess maybe some studio executive saw his stuff and was like, hey, do you want to direct a Children of the Corn remake? Sure, why not, right? It's a popular franchise, so maybe he thought he'd make some money off of it. I mean, it's been a while since he's actually directed anything, I believe. His filmography is extremely strange, and there are like gaps, so I don't know what the deal is, but he enters the horror sphere with this film. It was finally picked up in January of 2023 by RLJE Films and Shudder. So it is coming to Shudder March 21st, I believe, if that's the correct date. And as of this recording, March 3rd, Friday, it is out in theaters. So if you are interested in watching the film, regardless of my review or whatever, then you should be able to go to the theater and watch the movie. I mean, personally, I would suggest if you're going to watch it, just wait until it's on Shudder. I mean, even then, if you don't have Shudder, if you really want to watch the film, you only have to pay, $5 or $6, I think, to subscribe to Shudder for at least a month, and then you can watch it. But let's dive into the review before we get crazy. So it was on the shelf for like 3 years, probably because it's kind of a steaming pile of dog shit. Excuse my language, but I gotta be honest. Us at Grave Discussions, if nothing else, we're pretty brutally honest about our opinions on things. So, I mean, that's my opinion on this movie, just right off the bat. Now, I'm going to tell you what it's about, but I will preface this review by saying that I have only ever seen the first Children of the Corn adaptation, so the original 1984 picture, and then I believe I've seen the 2009 remake, which is the Children of the Corn film that preceded this one. That one was a little bit more of like a faithful remake to, I guess, the short story, but also the 80s film, because, it still had a lot of the same type of themes. There was this religious aspect. There was the whole plot point about the adults, the outsiders coming into town and interacting with the kids and everything. But I don't know. I don't even know if I've seen the entire movie of that one. It's almost like a fever dream. I don't know what even inspired me to watch it. I definitely had a lapse of judgment, no matter how many minutes of that movie I saw, because of what I did see. I just remember it was also terrible. And to my knowledge, none of the sequels to the 84 film are really any good either. I'm shocked that 8 more movies came out after that one, but that's either here nor there. I mean, when you got money on the line and you have like a successful and well-known brand like Children of the Corn, you know, I suppose it's understandable, even though they were like direct to video, but whatever. And I will also say, just to throw this out there, because it'll probably come up anyway, if you haven't really paid attention to grave discussions or know my personal opinion on the subject in general, I really don't mind remakes. I mean, I'm kind of, neither here nor there about them. I love certain remakes, and some of them are completely terrible. I'll admit that. It's just like with any movie, you have movies that are good, movies that are bad. It's all subjective anyway, but the concept of remakes themselves, I know, really eats at a lot of people, like to an extreme degree. People will like jump to Facebook or Twitter, whatever social media they use, and just like completely rip the very idea of a remake apart. And I don't really quite agree with that. I mean, maybe it's because I also approach the topic at a slightly different angle, because I am a filmmaker. I mean, aspiring to be, professional to that level. But, I don't know. I guess I look at it in a bit of a different way, because one thing is for certain: remakes are absolutely made primarily to make money off of an existing franchise that already has fans, that is easily marketable. I mean, it's why, even though people seem to hate remakes, a lot of people, that's why remakes or reboots or requels or whatever are the most talked about horror films of any given year, right? Halloween, Scream, the upcoming Friday the 13th film, whatever other IP, I mean, Hellraiser even, right? Last year. All of these properties are going to be the most talked about because they already have a very strong fan base, right? A very strong following. Studios and producers know that there's this inherent appeal when it comes to those movies. So, when you're going to remake it, sure, you're going to have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, well, why are they remaking it? Don't touch it. It was a classic. You're going to ruin it, blah, blah, blah. I disagree with that, by the way. But, I mean, come on, guys. It's so obvious. Like, you're commenting on this thing is marketing for them, right? It's word of mouth. People raging about this stuff, posting it, gets them attention, right? It gets other people to purchase the film, or go to the theater or stream it or whatever, and make that moolah, right? And that's really it. And then, of course, the secondary thing from a non-financial perspective is that you do like revive this property kind of for the modern day audience, and allow, changes to be made, allow the property itself to evolve in such a way that you're able to kind of get it out to potentially new fans, right? I mean, there are probably a lot of people who maybe, never saw the new Hellraiser. I'm just going to use that as the example. And or never, well, they heard about the new Hellraiser. They had never seen any Hellraiser, maybe, right? And so they watched this one. Now they're a Hellraiser fan. Maybe they went back and watched the original, and maybe some of the other ones. I don't know if I would, but it's possible, right? So that's also like the point. And I think that's great, because we love a lot of these movies, and maybe some people aren't even really aware of some of these movies' existence, but they hear about a remake and then they watch it, they like it, and they go back and watch the old one, they like it. So, I'm really not pressed about the idea of remakes. I think it's totally fine to have them. I don't think they ruin the original. It's just another movie. I mean, if you hate the remake and you love the original, great. There's nothing more really to it to say about that. The same is true for Children of the Corn. So rant over. I'm going to talk about this movie now. First of all, though, I will say I am pleased to announce now, if you haven't seen it already, that I am writing reviews on an occasional basis for some smaller horror titles for De Facto Film Reviews. It's a local Michigan brand, and partnered with my friend and fellow filmmaker here, Robert Butler, who invited me on. So thank you, first of all, to him. And my very first review on that site is Children of the Corn. It's already out, so just go to defactofilmreviews.com and look for Children of the Corn. You'll be able to read my review. Of course, I'm going to be regurgitating a lot of the same stuff that I wrote in that review here, but I have kind of more time and words here, so I'm going to expand on a lot of those thoughts. So definitely still continue watching this video if you're here, but go check that out as well. So this Children of the Corn, it kind of takes a leap from the original in almost every way. So if you have seen the original, of course, it revolves around this boy, Isaac, who's kind of this cult leader almost. He and the children of Gatlin, Nebraska, kill all of the adults in their town and kind of take over because they are influenced by this supernatural presence called He Who Walks Behind the Rose, and who kind of like has dominion over the corn crop in their town, which is like their primary, source of revenue. But they kill all the adults because they're doing a crappy job and they want, the town for themselves. So there's this religious aspect to it because, Isaac is kind of like this very like religious fanatic cult leader type of guy. And, there's talk of the Lord and everything like that. So how the kids actually like react to Isaac, how they're effectively brainwashed by him, is very indicative of like cult-like behavior with this kind of religious element to it. Pretty common in movies, pretty common trope, but that aspect permeates throughout the entire film. And then it's kind of intruded upon by these two outsiders. I call them outlanders. One of which is Bert, a doctor, and then his, I think, girlfriend who wants to have a family with him. But they kind of represent this scientific side of the conflict, right? Up against the religious side of the conflict, right? Faith-based side, which is an age-old conflict. So already that makes sense, right? Science, religion, plus adults versus kids. So there's a lot going on in there, but it makes sense. And the way that it plays out in the film also makes sense, even though these two adults are coming at it from a scientific kind of angle, they're also mixed in to this whole supernatural thing that's going on in this town. And then they finally realize that there is indeed a supernatural presence there. And so their beliefs are also affected, and they don't know what to think. So it's a whole thing, right? But it makes sense within the movie. This one, there really isn't a religious aspect. It's more of like an eco horror film because the film essentially starts off with a little girl, Eden, witnessing this mass murder at the children's home that I believe she is staying at. And she's the only survivor there. The perpetrator is killed, and along with a bunch of like little orphans there, they're killed. And So somehow, in that scene, she doesn't really give off any signs of like being demented or evil or anything like that. But then I guess she goes and wanders through the cornfield for several days before she's found. And I think it's insinuated that in the corn, she discovers this same supernatural entity, except that his name is shortened. It's He Who Walks. I don't really understand the point of that, but that's what it is. And from that point on, I guess she also kind of acts as, its messenger, its harbinger, kind of similar to Isaac, but she doesn't approach it from any type of religious angle. She just kind of tries to manipulate the kids and say, like, hey, the adults are messing this town up. You learn that the adults have agreed some time ago to allow this agricultural, like, super giant grow synth into town and like pump chemicals onto the corn. And so the corn and the soil subsequently is dying. And their entire crop is just about to go kaput. And so now they only have 2 days to make a decision whether they want to subsidize their land to the federal government or not. I mean, pretty easy decision, I guess, at that point. But of course, the kids come in, they say, hey, don't we get a vote? Also, there is one of the kind of top guys' daughter, Bolin Williams, who's played admirably by Elena Kampouris. She's probably the best part about this movie. I'm just going to say that right off the bat. But yeah, so there's this kind of three-way conflict between the adults, the kids, and then Bo and her friends, who are kind of like teenagers, right? They're going into college. She's going to strive to be a microbiologist. So that's essentially the setup. After a while, the kids like round up all the adults and then slowly begin to kind of kill them all off. The pacing here is much different. I mean, in the original 84 film, that opening scene is the kids like killing off all the adults, and there's nobody left except for, I guess, that like mechanic guy, and then of course the Outlanders come in and intrude, right? But here it's a little bit different. They take their time killing off the adults, so the adults are kind of still in play. So you would think there would be this kind of generational conflict, in the movie, much like there was in the 84 film. And there kind of is, but not really. It's not really with the adults and the kids, because the adults kind of become like a side element, like midway through the movie, because they're just pretty much used as props for like kills, essentially to showcase Eden's supposed like cruelty. But it's just very strange. I feel like they missed the mark on that, because it really takes a back seat to what becomes the conflict between Eden and Bo. And Bo's friends like really don't do shit, honestly. They're really unimportant. They're there, and they kind of formulate this plan with her, but I mean, I don't know. They might as well not even be in the movie at all, including one guy who just gets killed early on. I mean, I'm trying to make this as spoiler free as possible, but I don't know. It's hard because I really don't think this movie is really worth seeing, but I'm going to try. So anyway, that's what's happening. So once this like adult thing kind of takes a back seat and it becomes Bo versus Eden, the pacing, like I said, just gets really choppy. And I think the movie really suffers because of that, because like I said, it's an exercise in redundancy at that point. It's like several scenes in a row of Eden like trying to intimidate the adults, taking certain adults or an adult and like making an example of them essentially, and saying like, oh, we're gonna give them to He Who Walks. And then it's every time Bo coming in, trying to play the hero, psyching herself up like, I'm gonna fight I'm gonna save everybody. I'm gonna like save the town, blah blah blah. And then she just kind of backs off, which is awful, which is so awful. It's probably the most frustrating thing about this movie. Kurt Wimmer wrote a final girl who is just like, I don't know, a complete coward, honestly, right? She can't get her act together at all until like the very, very last moment of the film, essentially. She keeps having these character development moments where she like tries to encourage herself to be strong, to overcome Eden and the other kids, and then just hilariously like fails every time. And it's understandable. It's really just her going up against all these kids, but like just showing that multiple scenes in a row is, it just makes her look extremely weak. Extremely weak. And it also goes against her values too, right? She's supposed to be very outspoken and strong, but she keeps just like either slinking away or failing or whatever. And even at the end, it's the same thing. Like she really just kind of resolves everything by sheer coincidence. So it's I don't know. It's a very strange character because I think Camporis actually puts on a great performance, but just the way her character is written is extremely, extremely disappointing. And I said it in my review for De Facto, but she's like one of the weakest written, protagonists in a horror film in quite some time, in my opinion. So that's kind of what happens. Then there's the whole aspect of the whole eco horror thing, because it makes a point to highlight the synthetic chemicals and everything that are being sprayed over the crops, and then Bo as this microbiologist. So you would think there would be this kind of environmentally conscious message throughout the film, but it's really mainly highlighted in one scene where the adults are taking the vote to let the government subsidize their land or not, and the kids are there, and there's this like big heartfelt speech by Bo, and then the kids want to vote and the adults laugh them all off in this really just strikingly awkward scene. It's almost like a parody, almost like the filmmakers knew that they were making something trash and just made it so absurd. Like that scene really put me off the entire movie going forward, and I still didn't know what I had to expect like for the next, I don't know, 50 minutes or so. It was just very strange. But that's really kind of the last that we get of this whole theme of the chemicals being sprayed onto the crops being a bad thing for the land, for the environment. And then we never really see Bo grow into her role as like the scientific lead character, because she really doesn't get a chance to employ any of that, except I guess for the end. But even then it's a very underwhelming moment. Like she doesn't really put her brain to that much use, I would say, for how smart she's supposed to be, for how much she claims to know about the land and science and everything like that. So I don't know, it just gets lost, muddled in everything else that happens later on in the film. And to that point, later on in the finale and in the third act of the film, it kind of becomes like a creature feature. So it already loses sort of what it was like claiming to be or appearing to be in the first two acts of the film. I was hoping that I would like that, but it gives very like early 2000s Sci-Fi Channel vibes. The monster is CGI, and once you see it in full effect, like it just looks shoddy, honestly. It's very obviously CGI. And it just gives those vibes, like when you would sit up until 2 a.m. watching those terrible B movies on Sci-Fi and you see those monsters and it looks fake as hell. That's essentially what He Who Walks in this Children of the Corn iteration like looks like. it gives off those vibes. And I don't know what the budget is for this movie. I apologize in advance for not researching that, if it's even publicly available knowledge, but it didn't seem good. And that should already be obvious by the lack of marketing for this movie anyway. So yeah, it just, I don't know. I didn't like the fact that it completely went in like a different direction in the third act. Like, if you were going to make a creature feature, just make a creature feature from the very beginning. And at least if you're going to do that, you're going to shift into that direction, at least make it good. Like, I don't know, make it a practical monster, or at least give it something else to do. I mean, even when it emerges, He Who Walks is still kind of a non-factor almost, because Eden is still the antagonist. So I think the 84 film did it better, right? The He Who Walks Behind a Rose just kind of emerged in that, groundhog like fashion, and then took over Isaac at the end, but it wasn't like overwhelming. It didn't like overshadow anything, or it wasn't anything it wasn't supposed to be. But in this one, I just thought the idea was cool, but the execution was it left a lot to be desired, is what I'll say. So yeah, I don't know. Dialogue was awful. It just everything felt like it was written to be like a punchline or something for the trailer, or I don't know, something to put on the poster or something. And then the delivery of most of the actors for a lot of those lines was very over the top. The pastor in particular, I guess he's been in a lot of stuff, but his performance I just felt was extremely dramatic, and not like in a good way. I mean, it was like kind of hokey, over the top. And that was the case for a lot of the acting here, unfortunately. The actor who played Eden, Kate Moyer, I mean, she did fine, but she just wasn't naturally creepy like the kid who played Isaac in the 84 film was. So it wasn't really that believable that she could be this character, She did well for what she was given and like who she is as a person and an actor, but coupled with the fact that a lot of her manipulation of these kids was kind of done off screen, it was just very difficult to believe that she could be this person in the film and somehow convince all these kids to essentially commit like genocide of the entire adult population of the town with I don't know what, just saying like, hey, adults suck, they're killing all the crops, let's just do it, let's just take it for ourselves. It was just hard to believe. So that was another aspect. So overall, just really, really poor script. I think the script itself really dragged this movie down immensely, because there were some okay special effects, like the gore was pretty good. And then, like I said, Camporis as the lead, Bo, put on a good performance. And there were some other actors who put on decent performances. The movie looked okay. It sounded okay. But from a writing and story, aspect, it just failed miserably, honestly. So I gave this movie out of 5, I think 1.5 stars out of 5. And on De Facto, I gave it like a 1 out of 4. And I think that's fair, honestly. I mean, there's some entertainment to be had. It's not the worst movie ever, but do I recommend you watch it? Not really, honestly. If you're going to watch any Children of the Corn, watch the first one and then probably call it a day. And all I'll leave off with is saying that, maybe some things should get out of the corn and die. And Kurt Wimmer, I think, honestly, you should probably just stick to your like futuristic action movies and probably not touch at least Children of the Corn again. Like, maybe try a different horror movie with like an original concept, but this wasn't it. Sorry to say. They tried to do too much different, which is fine if you have a good, tight script, but this wasn't it. So I've rambled on long enough. This is probably going to be like my longest video yet, but I definitely had a lot to say about this movie because it just really rubbed me kind of the wrong way. And I wish it was better. I wish it was, because conceptually, like, I think there was potential here, but it just didn't hit the mark. So yeah, that's going to be the end of the video, guys. Obviously, as always, you know, if you like the content, please subscribe, leave a thumbs up, hit that bell for notifications and all that good YouTube stuff. But I will see you next time with more horror reviews or topics or whatever else you want to see. Let me know what you want to see. And have a great rest of your day. Until next time, I'm Barnabas, and we'll see you back here at the Boneyard.